There we go. Okay, good. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm. I actually have one monitor, and then I'm looking at you on a 4K TV that's just above my desk that I use as my other, I guess you could call it operations monitor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah, so we'll go live in about a minute. So I'll just ask you to keep silent for a bit. Yeah. Okay. See you in a bit. Hey, good evening, everyone. Those of you that are joining us on the stream that are live. Yeah, looking forward to this evening, the stream this evening. We're going to be talking about bullying and harassment and the, how should we say, the relationship with health and safety, but also some of the nuances with bullying and harassment, investigations as such. Depending on where you are in your jurisdiction, in your locale. Oh, there's an echo. Thanks, Dan, for letting me know. I will figure that out in just a second. Okay, how about now, Dan? Is the echo gone? Of course, there'll be a bit of a lag. Oh, well, I'm assuming he'll get back to me and let me know if it's gone or still present or what have you. Anyway, yeah, so we're going to be talking about bullying and harassment and the relationship between that and health and safety. And of course, it's not gone, it's still present, Dan? The echo's still there? Anyway, that's the terrible thing with the delay in the chat. Anyway, yeah. So what I'll do is rather while we're getting. So Dan, yes or no? Is there an echo? Yes, or the echo's still there? Oh, I think I might have. How about now? That likely has shut it off because I had two mics going at the same time. There we go. It was all me. It was all me. Yes. Okay. There we go. Anyway, I'm going to be joined by a colleague and friends, and we've worked together in the past. And we're going to be talking about bullying and harassment, but let's just talk about a few things first, now that I think I've got the echo part fixed up. So, thanks, Dan. Anyway, we're going to talk about bullying, harassment, and of course what it has to do with health and safety. But first off, let's just go over the chat rules and have them in mind. And I want to apologize right off the bat. I reconfigured my office, not much that you can see, but it's everything beside me. And unfortunately, my mic had to end up on mounted on my desk. So as a result, there might be the odd bit of reverberation, and I'll be trying to figure out a solution to that later on. But it was just, there wasn't enough time in the day to get it fixed. So anyway, those of you that are joining us in the chat, participation is nice. Do me a favor, introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from. If you don't know me, my name's Kevin Barrett. I'm a safety professional, and I started this channel a few years ago with a few-fold effort. One, to create a community with health and safety professionals, and so I could provide some of the mistakes, and God knows I've made lots, and how I've learned from them, and other people could benefit from them. And I also wanted to give back to the vocation that has given so much to me and supported my family for almost, it seems like, a lifetime. So please, you don't have to be as eloquent, but introduce yourself, where you're from, who you are, what you do, etc. The other thing is, if questions occur in the chat, you want to offer your opinion, you want to offer a thought, by all means. That's how we learn, and we learn from each other, and that's what builds a community, is being able to do that. So go ahead, ask and answer questions. Your knowledge, your opinions count, but please be civil. No name calling, no insults. We have become experts in our field, or good in our field, because we're a culmination of our experiences, and sometimes people haven't been afforded the opportunity to have those experiences yet. So they may ask questions where they may seem, I don't know, for want of a better term, foolish or not making sense to you. They're asking the question because they don't know and they want the answer. So don't be insulting. Be civil. The next thing is, this is not professional advice. We are going to be talking about stuff. This is not meant to be take place of hiring an HR professional or hiring a safety professional. No way, shape, or form. It's not meant to be professional advice. There's no contracts being signed, no money changing hands, but it's just a way to pull knowledge, and hopefully we all grow and get something out of it. And thanks, Dan, from New South Wales, Australia. Yeah, so now, just as an aside, I'm working on a few more guest spots. One is a conflict resolution specialist, and another person is going to be a safety professional working in heavy construction. And when I'm talking about heavy construction, I'm not talking just civil, but building large buildings and so forth like that. So heavy commercial construction. And I'm going to be starting a hazard assessment class via live stream and video, but a combination of the two. And I'm hoping to work on a few different guest spots, like hopefully having one is a police officer talking about the interaction between health and safety professionals and police officers, should there need to be a collaboration between the two. Often in many jurisdictions in Canada, if there's been a fatality or a very close to fatality, or there's obvious negligence, a lot of times police officers will investigate, do a parallel investigation along with health and safety. And in times, depending on your jurisdiction, you could end up with the law enforcement officers, the authority having jurisdiction of the workplace. In this case, it would be Alberta Health and Safety, or Alberta OHS, and then, of course, the local safety professional. So those sort of things can, cause some issues, and I'd hope that I can find somebody, but no promises, something I'm working on. Yeah, so that's what's coming up. I really will get that spot fixed one day. Yeah. So, with no further ado, what I want to do is introduce a friend of mine, Mike Sonderman. I'm just got to bring him in and hopefully. Oh, my. Oh, hold on. There he is. Welcome, Mike. You're on camera, so thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time. We all have busy schedules, so thank you for taking the time to be part of this. And so I'll just give a slight bit of background. Mike and I worked together at a post secondary institution called the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. Um, and we had a lot of interaction. And between the two of us, I think I learned more. But I'll leave that with Mike. And I don't want to beleaguer too much. I'd rather have Mike tell us about him, his history, and then we'll get started into some questions. But before we get into that, if you have a question, by all means, put it into the chat. If it pertains to what we're talking about, we'll stop and answer it. But if it's something to do that's off topic, then what we'll do is we'll handle it at the end, okay? So please take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Kevin. So, just a bit of a brief introduction for your viewers. I immediately upon graduating university got into the field of helping people resolve their conflicts, and so I did that by being trained as a mediator. I followed that up with a stint in law school and a relatively short career of being a lawyer. I am not now a lawyer and have not been for almost 25 years now. So, as Kevin said earlier, nothing that I say tonight should be construed as being legal advice at all. This is just a discussion and something to provoke some thought. After going into or leaving the law, I got very lucky and started a really fascinating career at SATE, the organization that Kevin told you about. And one of the things that I was responsible there for was for student conduct and the conduct of employees in some situations. And during my tenure there of almost 15 years, I conducted roughly 450 workplace investigations. Obviously, using the knowledge that I obtained while practicing law and going through law school. We had a population of 2,200 employees, roughly 40,000 plus registrants every year, so we were pretty busy. As a friend of mine said, it was a little bit like being the sheriff of a town of around 15,000 people, because that's how many people were on campus roughly every day. After that career was over, I got into the consulting world and I began to consult with companies who were in need of investigators coming in to investigate breaches of policy and breaches of Alberta legislation, mainly the Occupational Health and Safety Act. One of the things that I also got into was conducting re-investigations. So investigating for the second, or in a couple of cases, the third time, allegations that were made against individuals. So I got a real opportunity to see how the um, the market was conducting these investigations. I have taught investigations. I've presented at national and international conferences on investigative techniques, and currently now I've left the consulting world. I needed a greater purpose and I wanted to be part of a greater team, and I certainly have found both of those things. I'm now the head of human relations at the Tsuut'ina Nation Police, which is an Indigenous self-administered police service just on the western edge of Calgary, Alberta. So, and nothing that I say here today is meant to represent my employer. It's just as my personal thoughts on where we're at with harassment and discrimination.
Mm-hmm. So, before we get started with the first one of my questions, Mike, there's been a question come up from Dan in the chat. In Australia, we have training recommended for internal investigations which is a certificate for in government investigations. Is there something similar in Canada? And all I know of is that courses are taught through university as a continuing education basis, and people can enroll in them if they want. I don't know of anything else.
Yeah, Dan, that's an excellent question, and thanks for joining us from Australia. The one great thing about doing presentations virtually now is we can reach people around the world, so I think that's fascinating. One of the problems that we have in Canada, and particularly in Alberta, is the lack of any standardization and certification of investigators. It is literally the Wild West out there where Kevin, well, and nothing about Kevin. Kevin would be excellent at this, given his history and his experience in conducting safety investigations. But somebody could just hang a shingle up off of the side of their home or their office and say they're workplace investigators and get the job. It is tremendously scary space out there that is dominated by two main professions. Well, three main professions, really. The first profession is lawyers. There are nothing but problems with lawyers who conduct workplace investigations. The second group of people who are conducting a lot of workplace investigations are former police officers. There are lots of problems associated with investigations conducted by former police officers, and there are HR professionals who are doing it as well. Again, lots of problems from investigations emanating from there. We need a provincial standard. There probably should be national standards as well. At the moment, we do not have that. So I think Australia is ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm. And just as a bit of background, I had Dan on as a guest previously, and something a lot of people don't know is health and safety and these type of investigations in Australia are relatively new. It was the mid 80s when their health and safety legislation came into being, and they started actual movement, whereas in Canada's had it for over 100 years.
Right.
So, but it's funny how the late adopters are actually starting to get ahead of the curve, which is, I think, kind of neat.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily a surprise because I think a late adopter would have a more holistic view of workplace safety than you have as you're building it up. And I think one of the things that's very common in an organization is to get stuck in a mindset and in a bit of a rut, right? To say that, we've never looked at things this way before, why would we now?
Mm.
And so a late adopter would have the benefit of all of our failures and all of our experiences, right? Both positive and negative. So I'm not entirely surprised that that new adopters would be a little bit further ahead than us or on an equal playing field.
And that speaks a lot to it. So yeah, that is a good point. Yeah. I hope that answered your question, Dan, because now I have one. Michael, what do you see is the biggest failure with organizations as far as bullying and harassment processes?
Ooh, well, where do we start? I think one of the biggest problems is that the assumption that doing the bare minimum that the legislation requires you to do is actually going to do anything. So in Alberta, the bare minimum requirement is that you investigate a concern or concerning behaviors that are reported to you. There is no guidance in terms of how that is to happen. There is no guidance as to what the outcomes can be. There is no guidance as to anything beyond that there needs to be an investigation. My view of investigations are that they're tremendously complex things, and these are essentially failures in human interactions. And, we as organizations tend not to spend a lot of time um, proactively preventing these sorts of failures. What I see is that if you are only doing the legislated minimum, you are only reacting, you are not proactive. And one of the things I learned from you, so I shook my head when you said that you learned more from me than I learned
Mm.
from you. One of the things that I learned is that a really well-structured, forward-thinking health and safety environment and health and safety culture is proactive, and it predicts failure, and it
Mm-hmm.
looks for root causes, and it looks to eliminate root causes. When it comes to harassment and bullying, what we have is simply reaction. That would be the number one thing, that we spend no time or resources in most organizations trying to prevent those crises in human interaction that cause and underlie harassment and bullying complaints.
Wow. So, just to build on that last point, um, there's no best practice approach or no set of guidelines anywhere. Like it's just basically go and do your best, or like.
So if you are bringing in a lawyer to conduct your investigations, or you have hired someone who is formerly a lawyer, what you'll oftentimes get is a quasi-judicial, quasi-criminal investigation that's very lawyerly, right? You should read some of the reports that I've read. I mean, these things read like legal briefs, and they go on and on and on, and they delve into the case law. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't address the underlying human failures, right? A police officer, these investigations tend to be run like they're interrogations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this isn't an investigation, is essentially an HR practice. And then you turn to the HR professionals that do this, and you know, is it the, I can't remember the is it a syndrome? It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think,
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. The
right.
Dunning
So,
Kruger effect.
yep. So you take a 3-day course, and then you go and you investigate a historical sexual harassment claim where someone is complaining that their boss has been sexually harassing them for 25 years, and the person has never come forward before now. Well, how in the world do you begin to do that after 3 whole days of training? And this is where, the fact that, as Dan points out, you have minimum certifications in Australia. We don't have that here, so we have no floor. But the other thing I would say is that really effective investigations are highly nuanced. And we can teach people how to interview complainants and respondents. We can teach people how to assess information that we gather. We can tell people how not to scare the hell out of someone who has made a complaint when we're investigating or is the subject of a complaint. But in order to deal with some of the complexities of what we're seeing in the workplace, you need far, far greater training than simply a minimum, a 3-day course or even a certification process. Really highly effective investigators know about interviewing techniques. They know how to assess information. And just as importantly, they know the neurophysiology of trauma and how you speak to people who've been
Mm.
traumatized, right? So it is a really complex area of interaction, and frankly, we don't do a very good job of teaching people that. I've had conversations with colleagues about what would the minimum length of training of an investigator be, and 2-year diploma program, right, would be, I think, a start,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
it's difficult. And the why is this important? This is important because it's a conflict between humans. And if you do it wrong, you can damage a person. You
Mm-hmm.
can contribute to the trauma that they've experienced in the workplace. You can harm them. You can further harm them. You can end someone's career. You can put them at financial risk. You can increase their mental unhealth. This is not a simple thing that we're looking at.
Mm.
And then the other thing where organizations generally fail And this was an area that I, at the end of my time in consulting, began to become more interested in. I was less interested in conducting investigations and more interested in doing the thing that almost no one does, and that's remediate the damage that's done as the result of complaints, whether they're upheld or whether there aren't. Because the moment there is a complaint made, an investigation happens, there will be ongoing damage regardless of the consequences or the outcomes of that investigation.
Um, I can't agree with you more. Even looking at it from the health and safety point of view, um, and I've made a career of going in and repairing damaged safety cultures. But first off, you have to figure out why it happened, why it occurred, and before you can begin to start rebuilding. So, I agree with you so much, just even from my side of the fence looking in and understanding from that point of view. But on that note, what role do you see like this the safety professional playing in the investigative process? And the reason I ask this is in most jurisdictions in Canada, bullying and harassment fall under health and safety legislation, but often what happens is the health and safety professionals get left out in the cold.
Yep, they do. I think of places like British Columbia and Alberta that have, there's no system that I've seen anywhere else like British Columbia's.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that WorkSafe BC is as holistic and as broad and as forward thinking as I've ever seen in my life. Alberta's, where do we find the definition of harassment and bullying is in occupational health and safety legislation. But you're right, a lot of them separated out. So what is the role of a health and safety investigator as well, in relation to an investigation of harassment and bullying? It would depend, I think, on circumstances, but I think that those people who conduct workplace investigations would do well to spend time in, around rather, health and safety investigators to see how you conduct investigations.
Mm.
Because what I was always impressed by is, the breadth of access that you are given is you need to find out what is relevant in your investigation. You will follow information where it requires you to go. And institutions make that available to you. That's oftentimes not the case for investigators in harassment and bullying. They don't have access.
Really?
They also oftentimes don't have the support of senior executives within an organization. And you and I work together long enough for us to know that that doesn't always happen in the workplace and investigation side as well. But
Mm.
the main thing I think is that, what we can learn is the proactive nature of your investigations as well as the root cause. So another failure, I think, of a lot of human, or of harassment and bullying investigations is they never touch root cause. They go to the issue of, did this happen? Was this said? Was this action undertaken? Yes or no? And then they leave it at that. The question is why? And this is one thing that we can really learn from health safety professionals is that root cause analysis. And as an employee conducting investigations in an organization, the answers when we conducted root cause analysis on some of these investigations is uncomfortable. And if you do not have a robust health and safety culture, you will not have a robust investigative culture either. So one of the things that I think that we can also do is learn from each other is have the conversation about what is the wider culture in which we work. What are the constraints on us and what are we able to do? And then the other thing I think that we have to do is we have to acknowledge the interrelationship between harassment and bullying investigations and health and safety. Uh, Oftentimes, health and safety investigations deal with physical safety of individuals. but we're getting rid of, and I think we're moving to the notion that health is health, regardless of whether it's physical
Hmm.
or whether it's mental.
Hmm.
I don't know what the numbers are in terms of hours and dollars lost and spent on physical injuries at work. But any research I have ever done on the impact of mental illness at work, stress, anxiety, suicidal ideations, suicidal attempts, the cost to the health and benefits of an organization in terms of medication. These things are many, many times more expensive than the physical injuries that occur to workers. And
Hmm.
so there is a 100% correlation between health and safety cultures and investigations in health and safety or harassment and bullying or discrimination complaints and the response to them.
Yeah. I don't have the figures at my fingertips. I did a live stream on this about 6 months ago, I think it was. And just some of the figures I do recall offhand is that usually mental health claims um, have, and I believe it's a 50% greater chance of failure of return to work than a regular broken bone or an injury or something like that. So
That's right.
it's almost twice as likely that that person is not going to return to full capacity in the workplace.
Correct. The other thing that you will find, obviously, in the mental health realm is the societal cost of mental health injuries far outweigh the cost of physical injuries,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially when we're talking about the more severe cases in the instances that lead to someone's self-harming, right,
Mm-hmm.
behavior, and the impacts on family and friends and colleagues. It's so health is health, and so long as we see that way, or conceptualize it that way, it's easy to see the interrelationship between health and safety and an investigation into other things in the workplace,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Well, and to be quite honest, and maybe I can lead into the next question. One of the things that occurs too is that when I was doing the research for that stream, is that less than 20% of managers or supervisors have um, are of any use to a worker trying to come back from a mental health claim. They're non-supportive, or if they are supportive, they become that helicopter person who's doing more harm than good. And by
Yeah.
helicopter, I mean constantly hovering over them. Um, and there's no value to a return to work process then. And so, on that note, um, when it comes to all this, do you see it helpful to have written procedures that clearly outline and define roles for all of those involved, managers, health and safety professionals, HR professionals, etc., and even some guidelines?
Absolutely, and I think this is another failure of a lot of organizations is that they have the bare minimum legislative requirement, but they don't go to the next step, as I said. One of those next steps is that you do have to advise, or you should advise all of your employees and give them some education on what you're going to do if you receive a complaint. And the reason for that, there are myriads of reasons for it. One is that if you are in Canada anyway, and you are in a publicly funded governmental or quasi-governmental agency, the law is going to require you to have um, those policies and procedures written out, and you're going to be required to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you aren't, then there will be consequences for you if you are challenged on the findings of your investigation. Um, but regardless, to me, it's an issue of fundamental fairness that anyone in an organization should understand um, what is involved in responding to these things, because um, if you have a complaint made against you, it's tremendously stressful. And if
Mm-hmm.
you turn to your policy and it doesn't say anything about what's going to happen, you're in the ether. You have no idea what's coming. That adds to your stress. So then you go ask somebody, and they may not know because there's no procedure written down. So chances of you being treated fairly through that process, I think, are fairly slim unless the policy is well written out and well established. The other thing is, everyone should have a right to respond in a meaningful way after having had some time to digest the complaint and the allegations. And we know that does not happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what resources are available to you is when you have a complaint made against you, you're oftentimes feeling like you're the one singled out, and it's you versus the organization. So that completely changes the employer-employee relationship. Again, it's because this is not a quasi-legal thing. It's not a legal thing at all. This is how you interact with people. And I think if we started from a place of being empathetic and asking ourselves, what would we want to know if this was us, then we would, having allegations against us, we would have policies and procedures in every workplace, but we don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe, and some of that might lend to the next thing I was going to ask you is, okay, besides blatantly ignoring bullying and harassment as actual safety and mental health issues, what else do you see organizations doing to their own detriment in that realm?
Geez, where do we start?
I couldn't ask you an easy question, eh?
Yeah, what do they do to their detriment? They don't have established policies, procedures. They don't fully resource um, an investigation. One of the reasons that I left consulting was because invariably what would happen is somebody would reach out, and the first question is, after they tell me their issue, the first question is, what does this cost? Because no one has it in their budget,
Mm-hmm.
right? And boy, if you want to save money, cheaping out on an investigation's not the way to do it. Um, Washing it away, washing it under the carpet. Um, and another thing that I think that we have to discuss and talk about, the gorilla in the room, an awful lot of investigations are begun with a purpose behind them. The purpose of any investigation should be to simply to uncover what occurred, and does it meet the legislative standard of harassment or bullying. It's the only two things you should be doing as an investigation. But we know inherently that a lot of people, and I have been asked to do this person needs to go,
Mm.
right? Or alternatively, you know, you can't rule against the boss or the person who the complaint is made against. I had a situation where somebody contacted me and said, you have to investigate, but you can't find that this happened because this person's on the executive and the board won't remove them.
Really?
So why are we even bothering?
Well, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, right?
Yep.
Um,
Well, and it is, to use a euphemism, it is sometimes the old boys club,
mhm.
right?
Well, and I find it parallels health and safety quite close because there's been lots of cases where I've either managed the team doing the investigation or been part of the investigation, and it was steered towards fault finding versus fact finding, and
Yep.
then of course you get into a pile of trouble, and it tends to follow you when you don't play that game. Yeah, I can see that.
Yep.
Um, well, in that case, and you touched on policy and procedure. So, besides aligning with the legislation, as far as drafting policy and procedure, what other advice do you have for either organizations, safety professionals, or whatever, when they're going to set down the road to either drafting this policy and procedure or revising what they've got as policy and procedure?
The number one thing you should keep in mind is that this is a procedure affecting human beings.
Mm,
So someone has been injured, someone has been damaged, um, this is a failure of human interaction. You do have to write your policy to meet some legislative or legal requirements, right? Depending on what business you're in, depending on your jurisdiction, you have to never offer employees anything less than the legislative minimum, but you should offer more. And one of the things that you can do is offer more is have your policies and procedures reflect the fact that the human beings are central to this. It isn't the legislation that's central. It isn't the whims of the bosses that are central. What is central is trying to determine what happened. And if we did this more effectively, I think what we would do is a number of things. And one is that we would have more respectful workplaces where
mm,
people feel more comfortable and more engaged, and they do not feel like it's me versus the entire organization. I think what we would find is that there are a lot of people, um, both who complain because I'm going to tell you that we got into a rut in the consulting biz a little while ago, where what we were finding were that complainants were constructing alternative realities. They had purposes in launching the complaint to get rid of people. Um, we know that there are people who are terrible bosses, people who are manipulative, harassing, discriminating, bullying bosses. There are things that underlie those behaviors, and there are things that underlie the behaviors of people who are going out and making stories up to get someone fired.
mm,
Firing them doesn't resolve a lot of those issues. And what if your investigation and your policies spent some time looking at what are the causes of these behaviors? And you may say, well, this is work. We have to get stuff done. We have projections. We have commitments to donors, commitments to our clients. The board requires us to meet our targets. Yeah, but the way we do that is by having healthy and engaged staff,
mm.
right? And listen, these individuals that were making up alternative realities, I mean, in many cases, they had been there for many, many years. So, what are you doing by simply firing them? You're hiring a bunch of people with no experience and no education to come in and do this job, and you're just fobbing the problem off on someone else. So, look at yourself as an organization and ask what you want to do with your people, and to what extent are you willing to go on to help those people. Everything that I have learned about managing, everything I've learned about workplace cultures, is the more you treat your employees as human beings and not as producers of revenue, the
Mm.
more healthy, the more engaged, the richer your company will be. And
Mm.
you have to start there,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
And I always get a kick out of the people who, as one British comedian says, "Oh, look, another study. What will they come up with next?" But who denigrate and discredit things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or the Hawthorne theory. Um, and really and truthfully, both of those get right down to the same thing. These are people with needs. These are people that want to be heard, and your people are your greatest resource. Yeah, it's sad that there's so many organizations who really don't seem to understand it. And I
Yeah.
always get worried when I look at an organization and I see that their org chart is a bunch of numbers or positions and numbers, no names, no identifier. Like these are people. Put names in there. Yes, they may change, but figure out a way to revise your org chart, even if it's just some sort of a software answer. But put names in there for goodness sakes.
Exactly. I also think too, that and I think your reference to the British comedian is right.
Mm.
Um, as we progress, we think we're always smarter than the generation before us. Definitely my newly adult kids think they're far smarter than I am.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was smarter than my parents. Sometimes, those real basic things, we forget about those basic things, and we don't need new studies. What if you as a manager, so I was retained by some people once to make it harder for them to be found responsible for harassment and bullying claims, right? What it came to me as was, hey, prevent us from ever getting a claim. And the reality is you can never prevent yourself from being sued, from having a claim made against you. What you can do, though, is you can eliminate the possibility of that claim being successful. So you should, as a leader, I think, ask yourself, and as a coworker, ask yourself, am I doing anything that alienates the people next to me or causes them some concern about me? And one of the ways you can ameliorate that is just by asking them how they're doing every day.
Mm.
Right? Get to know them as a person a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Listen, Kevin, you and I have known each other a long time. If we got together and you started to speak critically of me, I would love that because I know it comes from a place of love and care.
Well, thank you.
If I didn't know you, no offense, Dan, but if Dan said it, I might get my back up. How often have we worked in workplaces where people have sat next to each other for 10 or 12 years and they don't know each other beyond the work,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And let's just begin to treat everybody a little bit like that. And doesn't matter what your business is. You can have time during the course of your day or your week to get to know the person next to you a little bit more. So you can begin to build those foundations so that the odd comment isn't misconstrued, that you don't have to make up an alternative reality because you understand that that person has your back. And let's create a psychologically safe working environment where we can have these um, these conversations, but they don't result in any discipline. They don't result in us changing our respect for each other, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest things, when you and I work together, I have so many fond memories of working together as teams where we could disagree with things,
Exactly. Healthy
and it
conflict.
and it was great, right?
Yeah.
And what I oftentimes say to work groups, I say it to my colleagues now, and I certainly said it all the time when I was in the consulting biz, is, what are the great conversations that we have in our lives? They're invariably over a small table that's pretty loud. Oftentimes there's a beverage involved. And, you can look at somebody and go, you're absolutely wrong. And you can get into the weeds and it doesn't matter because right after you finish that conversation, you talk about the things that bind you together and you walk away and you're hugging each other, you're shaking each other's hands. There's no negative impact from those interactions. Imagine if that happened in your workplace.
Exactly. But honestly, when I've been part of high performing teams, what I've found is exactly that, is that healthy conflict is present in
Yeah.
the team environment. And when you have that, you have well functioning teams. So, um, the idea is, and once again with this channel, is coaching. And so maybe let's steer back to the investigation bit for just, if you don't mind. What are some of the biggest pitfalls that would be investigators? See how I term that, run
Yeah.
into, or the mistakes that they make when they're working on it, and things that may either hinder or tank their investigations.
Oh, geez. This is another where do I start one? Um, first of all, your initial outreach to someone. Okay. Invariably, it comes through an email. I have been assigned to investigate allegations made against you. Right. Um, okay, great. That probably means you've received a complaint. Human psychology says the first people to get to us and provide us information, we tend to believe. So you're going to get whatever you're going to get. Make sure it's in the format you need it to be in. Make sure that you ask, the complainant, have you provided everything? This is your complaint. It's not mine. I'm just a conduit, right? You're going to read it, but don't believe it. You can't believe it. So the first pitfall is believing the first person who makes the complaint.
Forming anchoring bias.
Yeah. Or alternatively, there's no way in the world Bob would have done that.
Mm.
Right. So you got to throw your biases out the window. Second thing is do some work about uncovering your unconscious biases. Right. Um, the second thing is don't scare the hell out of the complainant. You're a human. You're about to cause them an immense amount of stress. Learn how people react to that stress. Learn understanding the neurophysiology of trauma is and so you're going to learn how people respond to being stressed out. So don't make a bunch of assumptions. If you're standing in front of somebody, you're sitting across from them, and you hand them this document that says they're an abuser, that they're a harasser, that they've tremendously bullied somebody. Allow them the time and space to take the information away and formulate their response. Don't jump to conclusions. When you're speaking to someone in your interviews, don't read your questions.
Mm-hmm.
Write all your questions out, but you're engaged in a conversation. Treat the person across with you or from you with respect. Look them in the eye and write their answers down. Of course, you're not going to be looking them in the eye as you're writing, but have it as a conversation. The worst investigations ever. Tell me your name. How long have you been working here? Those happen all the time, right? Um, this takes some practice. When you see inconsistencies in an answer, your job is to point those inconsistencies out, and you ask the question, can you help me understand
Mm-hmm.
this? You don't do but you said earlier in your writing, so you're lying. Which are you lying now, or were you lying then? Right? We're not interrogating. It's not a police officer interrogating anybody. This is not a cross-examination on a witness stand. Know when the limit is to stop challenging somebody, because if you keep going, someone's going to challenge and appeal successfully that investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Understand what evidence is, what important evidence is, and what evidence you can use and you can't. Stop watching CSI Miami or Law and Order and thinking that you know things, and that that um, um, hearsay evidence matters, because actually it does not matter in an investigation at all. You can actually, the law in Alberta, and certainly the law in Canada, says you can get information and evidence from anywhere, and it's up to you to decide what weight to put on it. So understand those kinds of nuances. Um, the second thing is, um, ask yourself at every stage and at the end whether you have enough information to make a conclusion. Ask yourself whether you have put aside your biases. Ask yourself whether you have enough information to conclude.
Mm-hmm.
And ask yourself at the end, when you've made your decision, whether you had put aside all of your biases, your like for the person across from you, um, the political, environmental issues that may be floating around you. Have you put all of those things aside And have you, in fact, done what you were supposed to have done, which was to fairly and without bias assess the information that you have received?
Hmm. Yeah, and it's actually quite neat because if you're doing interviews for a safety investigation, you're conducting them correctly. Um, Usually, what I do is depending on the time of day and when it happened, etc., I go back to the nearest emotional landmark. So, if the incident occurred in the morning, so uh, tell me about your drive to work. And they say, well, why? Well, I just want to hear. They just start talking about your drive to work, and
Yeah.
just tell me how everything progressed throughout the day, and let them talk. And uh, it's just neat because you provide validation for those of us that are decent investigators. Notice I said decent. Um, uh, that we will do much of the same thing. We will ask, can we go back to this point? I'm sorry, I was writing notes and I need you to help me better understand this point. You said this, so can you expand upon that a bit? And just let them tell their story because
Yes,
it's their story.
it is. That's a great point, right? The other thing for would-be investigators, let people talk. I would book people in for an hour, but I would tell everybody I'm sending an invitation for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have as much time you want. Most people take about an hour. Some people take 7 minutes, right? But your story is your story. You
Mm-hmm.
tell it the way you need to tell it in your language, in your words, with your emotions. This is your life, and I'm just capturing it. This isn't what I need to get out, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what you need to tell me. And your story makes me think of one of my most um geez, I don't know. I was affected by this investigation more than I've been impacted by, I think, anyone. We had a gentleman who we got a phone call from a fellow who was an instructor at an institution, a post-secondary institution, and he said, "Listen, I just had a student tell me that if I didn't answer his question, he was going to meet me in the parking lot and he was going to beat me up." So, in general, that's not a good way to start your academic career in your first semester. So we, get the investigative team together, and one of the people is from the school involved. And as we were driving out, he's making this comment that this individual is going to be expelled. And so 20 minutes later, we're sitting in this room, and in walks this individual. He's about 6'5", and he's got maybe he weighs probably about 310 pounds, and he's got maybe 2% body fat. He's one of the hugest, most intimidating individuals I'd ever seen. And he sits down and he says to us, yeah, like I used to be um, the main drug dealer in my hometown, and I got sent to jail for a long time. And while I was in jail, the mother of my child died. And in jail, they wanted me to be the leader of all this stuff, and they wanted me to do these things. And I'm just thinking to myself, geez, if I do that, I'm never going to see my kid, and my kid is never going to have any parents. And and he changes his life, he says, and now he's a minister, and he's a motivational speaker in his community, and he came back to go to school so that he could get a trade and that he could earn some real money, because between ministering and motivational speaking, it's a rough life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, listen, I didn't know the answer didn't know, I didn't understand the question. So I went up to the instructor and I said, can you help me with this? And he goes, just sit down. And he became every other white guy that has ever abused me and paid no attention to me, and uh, the gentleman was of a different ethnicity and different culture, and he said he became every prison guard that I had dealt with for the years I was in prison. And I snapped and I let my kid down because you're going to kick me out of here. At which point I say, no, I'm not. Right? What can we do to make sure that you get an answer to that question? What can we do to help you? Because you shouldn't be threatening to beat up your instructor, but you should be given a chance in life, right? When life has been arrayed against you from some of your own decisions and some of your own choices, but you didn't beat him up. So what can you do? What can we do to help? And
Mm.
and in that one, Dan had asked a question here I see about asking open-ended questions. Dan, my first question is, to the person that's had the allegation made against them is, hey, listen, you've had a chance to review the allegations. What's your response? What do you need to tell me? For the people making the complaint, generally they've written out a complaint, but I still need to interview them because you never have enough information from something in writing. Hey, something is a concern to you. What do you need to tell me? Right. And then what I do is I keep the questions general until there's a need for specificity.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that you learn, but that's the way that human um, conversation takes place, right? If you're meeting somebody and they're new to you, you want to be able to develop a rapport and a relationship and some trust. Before I say, hey, did you hit him with your left or your right hand? I want to spend a lot of time getting the background about what led to all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So handy dandy teaching methodologies, right? Or you want this to be instructional in nature. This can help health and safety professionals as well in their investigations. There's a phrase that I've come to love that a mentor of mine taught me, and that is help me understand,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, we've all been in investigations where you're like thinking to yourself, are you kidding me? Like, you did this? Right? Or this is how you reacted, but you have to have a neutral face on. You're not taking sides at any point. Help me understand this is a very general question that actually really goes to the root of an awful lot of things and can really help us understand where people come from. So so that the more I think that you ask open questions, the more you'll become trusted because the person believes that you're interested in their answers. And then when it comes to the specifics that you need to know, they're more likely to tell you those specifics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things I tell investigators, and when I manage teams of investigators, and no matter what, like it was funny having to try to get them to leave their anchoring bias at the door. And I would always say that your anchoring bias is going to create confirmation bias for you, where you're going to be looking for your narrative to cement that anchoring, that first impression that you had. So, regardless of what you think happened, you're still going to go through the steps
Yes.
of your investigation. Because if you don't go through those steps, what happens is you're going to end up, you may draw the right conclusions. You might just draw the right conclusions, but what harm are you going to do as a result of it? And what if you don't draw the right conclusions? What are you going to do?
Right.
And you're going
My
to cause more damage than anything else.
Absolutely. I still think that my most controversial investigation ever was the best one I ever did, where I had the dean of a school, the academic chair, the instructor, and 25 students telling me that I had to expel a student for an outburst against a female. And we didn't, because in the course of our investigation, we uncovered that the female and two of her classmates set the guy up to have an outburst. They
Mm.
they manipulated it, and they did it based on his learning disabilities. And it was intentional, and they wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to get rid of him because he was different, because he had learning disabilities, because he stuck out like a sore thumb, and they hated him, and they were the bullies. But nobody saw that. Nobody knew about, well, one person who was invited to become part of the conspiracy turned over the emails to us. This is how we found out about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everybody else sees this intimidating guy and they want him gone. So, everything I had heard about this fella confirmed this outburst, everything. And, I want to make sure that all my coworkers are safe. I want to make sure that those people that we have a duty of care towards are safe. Everything in my body screamed this guy had to go, because nobody felt safe around him. But the facts indicated he had to stay.
Mm.
And so, you know, you talk about all of these biases that you can have. You can hear about this narrative about, people causing problems, or, whatever it is. You as the investigator have to go in there with a blank mind, a slate that's empty, and you just say to yourself, I am going to go where the information takes me. and
Absolutely.
and you I'm going to tell you that when I told the dean and the senior people in the organization that this kid wasn't going anywhere, that he was going to continue, you wouldn't believe the heat and the pressure I got. You wouldn't believe, when I was invited to a meeting to explain my decision, the anger in that room. And I can't say why he's still there. Right? Because the other thing you have to learn a lot are boundaries and confidentiality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you as the investigator, what happened when I was consulting as well. I remember phoning an executive director of a not-for-profit up and saying, okay, I'm done. This is what I found. And I was going to say 10 to 15 seconds of silence before what comes back is, you've got to be kidding me. Right? Nope, not. Sorry, I just made your life really hard. Right? But so that's one thing as an investigator that I think that you really should take joy in, is if you do something that causes a lot of people to be uncomfortable, because it might mean you did your job properly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is, you're going to tell people some really uncomfortable truths about themselves. I've had wonderful conversations with people who've been accused of being bullies and harassers, and I didn't find that they were. But that doesn't mean that they're great supervisors, that they're great coworkers, right? And when I say to them, I think the fact that you had a complaint made against you indicates that there's some problems, right? It's wonderful how open a lot of the people are in wanting to
Mm-hmm.
learn and wanting to change. So it's not a bad thing sometimes to go against what the organization finds. Sometimes even when people have been found um, that they have been harassing somebody, there's genuine shock and surprise. Right. So it's a great learning opportunity, unless, of course, the organization's out for blood, and then it doesn't become a great learning opportunity at all. Right. Because,
Well,
if you want to do it.
it goes back to fault finding versus fact finding then.
Right. And we could have a 15-hour live stream if you wanted to, for me to talk about the law and how complex it is in Alberta and in most jurisdictions, because in most jurisdictions have gotten away with the defensive, I didn't intend it. What it is
Mens
now
rea.
is, yeah, what it is now is 100% in most jurisdictions is 100% the impact that the actions or the words caused on the receiver. That's complicated, right? Now, in Alberta and in a lot of other jurisdictions, they say, well, you know, the person is a harasser who has said or done something to cause concern if the person knew or ought to have known it was reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's all these other things, but then you run into some gender issues. You run into issues of generational differences between people that are working together, certainly differences in ethnicity and backgrounds and these kinds of things. But it's really a complicated place to work these days, the work environment. It's
Well,
not simple to
especially
work.
I like when you said the generational gap, especially like I can remember my former father-in-law, he's passed away now, but um he actually it was quite normal, and he always used to like to give the paper boy a really healthy tip every month. And um we were over visiting, and the paper boy came to collect me and the wife and the kids. And he says, yeah, and he had a talk with them, joked around a bit, and then he gave him his money, and he said, oh, thank you, Mr. Frechette. And my father-in-law closed the door, and then he says, I like to give him extra because he does such a hard job, and it's tough for him. He's retarded.
Yep.
And like my father-in-law was the nicest, kindest man around. Literally, he would be overwrought if he knew he offended somebody. But my oldest daughter said, Grandpa, you can't say that. Well, why not? He is retarded. And in his mind, it was fine, because you think about when we were kids, Mike, that was normal language.
Oh, completely. A lot of my time consulting, and it probably ended up helping me to get the role I'm in now, but was with uniformed military and paramilitary services, right? A lot of first responders, and I did a training session, and it was fascinating the way the employer had set it up. The most senior people were in the first session. The most junior people were the second week, about 6 or 7 sessions. So, and I could track the response to um, the conversations that we were having. That intentionality is done. It's over. It means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What means everything is the impact on people. So, here we have, and in this one case, it was, people that have been in a fire service for 25 plus years. And I remember one old crusty guy, right? You know, uh, damn it all, you telling me the snowflakes rule this place? But when you got to the younger people are like, hey, this is our expectation of the workplace. And yeah, we totally understand rank. We understand the importance of rank. We understand that we should be held accountable if we do not accept rank in our workplace. But there are a bunch of decisions that we should be taking part in. And you know what? I will be offended if my coworkers are offended. So this is a concept that we in our generation have a hard time understanding, but that younger people fully do. I read a fantastic book that I read recently said, one of the problems in the work world today is that we have two dominant generations. The older generation who doesn't believe in trauma, and a younger generation that believes everything is trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do those things meet and interact, right? It's really a fascinating dynamic. And the Gallup organization and Deloitte have both done some work on the future of work and where we're headed. And it talks about the need to involve your staff far more than you ever have before, and the need to honor their uniqueness in a way that has never been required before. And the reality is if we live in a world, you and I used to be taught not to recognize color,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's dangerous to go down that road now, because what a lot of people of different ethnic backgrounds and different colors want is they want to be recognized as being distinct and unique from everyone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it can be tough, right? It's a difficult place to be a leader. I used to joke when I was consulting that I'm glad I didn't have a real job. because it's complicated and complex. And now that I've got a real job again, I'm thrilled about it because I get to navigate and help people navigate that complexity, but it's difficult. I see Dan had asked a question. He said, to clarify, would I agree that you get more info from open-ended questions than probing questions? Yeah, 100%, absolutely. And you get that for, I think, for a couple of different reasons. One is, as I said, those open-ended questions, especially the ones where you just say, hey, listen, this is your story you need to tell me, right? I'm not sitting here judging anything you tell me right now. I'll judge later, but I just want to hear from you. It creates a trust, it creates a connection. And you're more likely for sure to get more in-depth, better, and more honest answers if you approach it in terms of open-ended. Because if you start to ask detailed questions, it becomes your process. It doesn't be, and your story, excuse me, it doesn't become theirs. The other thing that that I think that everyone should understand, and this will help anybody in any investigation, silence is your best friend. There is no need for you in the midst of an investigation at the end of a lengthy answer or a small answer to necessarily jump in and ask the next question. I was in an appeal once of a gentleman who was unhappy with my findings. And the interview or the appeal panel sat and listened to him. And he spoke at one point, I think it was 37 or 47 uninterrupted minutes. And in those 37 minutes, because time is either something that you hold as a rope to rescue yourself, or you tie it around your, or you hang yourself. And it was pretty evident that he had done everything that we had alleged, and he had those fundamental root cause problems that we had addressed as well. So I think asking open-end questions, they don't have a necessary end to them, Dan. And there's a power to that because it allows people to continue talking. And I am of the view that some of the biggest pearls of wisdom that oftentimes changes the course of the direction of an investigation are completely unscripted moments where you are just allowing someone to talk, and then you are noting that this pearl of wisdom or this issue has been said, and you follow up in it the appropriate way, again, probably with some more open-ended questions.
Yeah, excellent stuff. And that's one of the faults I found I had early on in my career is I had this need to fill silences. And if if they weren't going to, I'd do it with my own voice. And one of the things that sort of changed that with me is, and I took this to, and I added it to my own investigative and interviewing technique. And an evangelical minister, Rick Warren is his name. He's well known. He wrote a bestseller book called Purpose Driven Life. But his son had mental health issues and committed suicide. And as a lot of people will say, the tragedy destroys a person, but depending on the person, it also can build you up bigger and better. And one of the things that he came out of that with is he said, when you're across the table from someone, and the amount of talking that you do should be generally reflective of the amount of emotional impact that's occurring right at that moment. And he said, so if there's a lot of emotional impact, you should have a lot of silence.
Yep.
And I took those words of wisdom and I thought that made so much sense to me. Because I'm exactly that person. I if there's silence, I want to fill it, and it's taken a lot of practice, shall I say, for me.
Yeah, and when you think about what the kinds of things that we investigate, right? So health and safety people are investigating somebody who might have been impaired while driving a tractor, Um,
Mhm.
somebody who has just broken up with his girlfriend and he's destitute, and while he's welding something, he's thinking of that, and then the next thing you know, there's a pipeline spill, and it's billions of dollars, millions of dollars to clean it up. I'm talking to somebody who allegedly said a racist word or did something, touched someone, for whatever reason. These people oftentimes are guilt-ridden. It's very emotional for them just being accused of doing something for the reasons that we talked about earlier. They have a need to fill that space, right?
Mhm.
And I think another thing is, if you're an internal investigator, okay, so you're conducting an investigation in your workplace, you could maybe be investigating someone too, and that can be uncomfortable. Um, the ability, I can 100% draw a correlation between investigations that are never challenged and investigations that give people all the time that they need to respond. We should place no limits on the time, the words, the pages, the evidence, the information that people want to provide us, and none, because they need that and they become honored by that. And they derive the sense that they have become important and central. An investigation where somebody's just going to read 13 questions off of 2 pieces of paper,
Oh.
that's bad. And the organization that you and I worked at, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. The very first investigation I ever did was with a very kind and sweet and lovely HR person who had been doing the investigations for the organization for a little while. And I was new to the organization. She said, "Well, I'll do up the questions." Right. And I can't even remember. Oh, I remember what the situation was now. It was a situation, it was a really weird one, where actually someone was harassing people that he wanted he hated. He would send them up ladders that were rickety and old, and sometimes the rungs were missing, and the people he liked would go up the new ladders that were totally safe, right? So anyway, one of she says, "Well, I'll write you the questions," and so I get a little booklet of questions, right, 5 or 6 pages, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, she starts reading them, like literally reading them, not listening to answers at all, just writing answers, right? And the questions didn't flow logically from what she was being told. It was like you might as well have just mailed the questions to the fellow, right? So the first thing I do is I do this when it comes my time, and I just lean forward and I said, "Okay, let's have a conversation." Right? Now, what ended up happening was a vice president heard about that, and I got a very angry phone call. But what the amazing thing was, what happened in the room is the guy leaned forward and we had a conversation, right? And he understood that I was talking to him as a human, and he wasn't just a piece of a process. And so I think that's important for people to understand.
Hmm. And I think we've spelled it out all through this too, Mike, is how bullying and harassment have negative effects, not just on the organization, but also the workplace culture, the safety culture, especially because, and I think in the last, I would say the last decade now, a lot of this is being viewed as safety. And so what happens is if, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when we're not dealing with these allegations, these issues, these situations of bullying and harassment, then it becomes the fact that we don't care about safety. Or the safety people end up getting painted in a negative view because, well, the organization doesn't care about safety. You're the safety person, so you're ineffectual and you don't give a rat's ass.
Sure. What does it say about you? What does it say about who you are in an organization if you have a concern about the way that you were treated and they do nothing?
Mm-hmm.
And we Hey, how many of us work for places that have these big, bold mission and vision statements that are actually 180 degrees opposite of what the people in the workplace are experiencing every day, right? We care about the safety of our employees. We've had 0 day or 50 and 100 days since the last accident, but we have terribly violent people who are managers and demean you every day,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So, like, those are the, you could, if you have a lot of turnover in your organization, you better ask why, right? And is this one of the reasons why?
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. I think that there's been a big change in the last 10 years. Some of it motivated by legislative changes, because certainly in Canada, we're pretty well aligned across provinces in terms of approach of harassment. There are some jurisdictions around the world that are far further ahead than we are. But I think that there is an increasing thought pattern that there is no difference between health and safety and harassment and bullying, um, because I know for sure there are studies out there that say that unsafe workplaces are unsafe for a variety of reasons. Lots of them physical, lots of them
Mm-hmm.
because there are no policies and procedures in place, lots of them because there's no training, but lots of them too because harassment, discrimination, and bullying are not things that are ever investigated,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And you're right, it is part of a wider culture.
Yeah.
And I think that those things are all going to dovetail more and more as we go on. I think that new generations, and we can critique them as much as we want, but I think they're driving us to the place where we need to be in our workplaces.
Mm-hmm. Well, like anything else, I think what we need to do is find a balance. Sometimes we tip to a much the other way. Like I'm a firm believer in your triggers are your responsibility, but the person pulling the trigger has also got to think, did I really need to take that shot?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and what I
and
mean
there,
by that is the language. Like you know what? There's certain terms that we were able to use in the '80s and '90s, but we can't use them now, and that's just the way it is. Get used to it. There's certain how should we say decorum that you're going to have to maintain in the workplace that changed from the 70s and 80s and 90s, but guess what, that's the way it is.
it is.
And I go ahead, Mike, sorry.
No, we evolve,
Yeah.
right? Things change. The other thing, I think that the next big step that has to happen, and I believe it's happening, I wish it would happen quicker. And I will take issue, and when I say this, I take issue with one thing that you said, but because we respect each other, it won't matter in the long run.
Okay.
Um, there are some people that have no control over their triggers because of the damage they've been through before. And I
That's true.
think that we're going to begin to recognize those things more and more. And I'd love to get to the point where we feel so comfortable with each other at work that we talk about maybe what our triggers are
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, which would be
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Um, and I think those workplaces, and I know they exist because I've seen them. I work currently in a workplace where there's a tremendous amount of trust and honoring of people's histories. I really think that that's the next horizon, is the greater understanding of the impact of trauma in the workplace and what it
Mm-hmm.
means,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. And just before we go to Dan's question, you're absolutely right. And I didn't mean to sound insensitive about the
No,
triggers,
no, I knew
but
where you were going, but you're about the most sensitive, caring guy I know.
oh well, thank you. But in the same token, I need that person to tell me, like, hey, Kevin, that really hits me the wrong way, really bothers me, cuts me deep, or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And oh, okay, so you've created that parameter in our relationship, and so that means if I want to continue that relationship, I have to accept that parameter, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But when you
I,
don't know, that's the problem.
That's right. And that's the rub, right, that we're finding a lot of. that people who are very sensitive towards a word, a concept, an idea, a thought, haven't done anything to warn anybody of that, and then now expect the organization to come in and sort of to end the person, right? So, the phrase cancel culture is out there.
Hmm.
A few years ago, I had the honor of being in the crowd and of course, their name is just flown out of my head. But an activist in the LGBTQ plus two community, who was the recipient of Alberta's largest ever human rights ruling because of the way that they were treated in school, in their high school.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the talk was about getting rid of safe spaces on campus. So safe spaces are places that we can all individually go and just be, and we can feel safe and not challenged about anything. And this person was advocating for the elimination of safe spaces, right? A person who is historically from a group of people who would be highly targeted. And what they were advocating for was the end of safe spaces and the introduction of what they called braver spaces, where what would happen is that they could live fully in their reality, fully and safely, and that they felt protected enough and honored enough to respond to respectful questions of others, right?
Well, I don't understand. To me, I thought they were both like braver spaces and safe spaces. I found them synonymous when what you just said.
Well, and a lot of us would, for a person like him and for others in certain political spectrums, they're still looking for safety, right?
Mm.
But what this person's advocating for is what we spoke about earlier, is the ability to have well-intentioned, well-meaning, respectful conversations that increase our knowledge, that increase our understanding and our awareness, that builds trust in our relationships. And it builds what you had talked about in the beginning. You're trying to create a community here. How do we create a community is by better understanding everybody who wants to be part of it, right?
And that's a
So
good point.
yeah, so let's do that. So let's hire a whole bunch of people who feel safe coming in to say, this is my reality, right? And then the reaction isn't, oh, snowflake, right? It is, hey, my new coworker has this boundary, just
Hmm.
like I have my own boundaries. And their boundary may be different, but that's okay because I'm an empathetic person and I think we should lead with empathy. And empathy, all it says is we honor others' rights to feel and think and live differently than us. It's all empathy
Hmm.
is, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to like it, don't have to support it, don't have to live that way. We just have to understand that people are different.
Yeah.
So,
And now Dan has said in Australia, harassment falls under the EOOD tribunal, Government for or Fair Work Commission. They're trying to bring it into WHS as psychosocial hazard. What are your thoughts? That's what they are right now, currently in Alberta.
well, we don't really define harassment other than it is words or action that cause concern that require a response, right? That so I don't mind that. I think that it's probably in line with what we were talking about earlier, the trend towards viewing health as health, and we don't aren't going to we aren't going to spend a lot of time worrying about whether it's mental or physical health,
Hmm.
right? That health is health. So I like that idea. Um, I don't necessarily have any opposition to it because Kevin, and I live in a place where it treats it that way too. And so I think that that's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
What I am always interested in is I do believe the devil is in the detail with respect to the legislations, though, right? So does it talk about definitional issues? One of the problems with just simply defining it as something that's a concern to the recipient is it opens up so many things. I've dealt with issues with clients where they have a very strong culture and someone comes in who's a little different, or a brand new person comes in, doesn't fit into that culture and opposes it. and now everyone feels the need that the culture is automatically shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Saskatchewan, our neighboring province to the east, doesn't view harassment as a health and safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
They have
Yeah.
it under their employment law,
Yeah.
and
See, with
they have a really interesting um, get out of jail free card in their legislation that it's I can't remember the exact definition, but it's not far from ours. So it's things that cause concern. It's out of the normal, and it's also totally not accepted in that workplace.
Mhm. See, here's what we have under the Alberta OHS as under the Act as our definition. Harassment means any single incident or repeated incidents of objectionable or unwelcome conduct, comment, bullying, or action by a person that person knows or ought to reasonably know will or would cause offense or humiliation to a worker or adversely affects the worker's health and safety. And this includes conduct, comment, bullying, or action because of race, religious belief, so the protected
Protected grounds.
situations, or a sexual solicitation or advance.
Yeah. And Dan has also asked the question that the end result, he says, of these changes would be to move bullying and harassment from a civil court to criminal court. Um, I have forgotten far more about the law than I would have ever remembered, because I've not been a lawyer for so long. But um, it seems to me that there is a spectrum of behavior that we're talking about. Um, you know, Technically, I can harass you by saying, "Hey, guys," if there's women in the room or people that
Mm-hmm.
are sensitive about gender issues. That's fundamentally different than me harassing you based on your ethnicity, of your gender, or your lack of an identified gender. And that if I make one comment versus a lifetime of it, um, I don't like criminalizing one-offs. I think we have to educate people. I
Mm-hmm.
hope that there is some standard there that really outlines a relevant tripwire that moves something from civil to criminal. I also am of the belief that the first step should never be punitive. It should be educational, or it should be dealt with in-house if possible by your typical human resource um, um, structures, and it should start with performance management if it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope in Australia you're not jumping to criminal stuff. I would hate for Canada and for any common law country to move to that civil code European view that so many things that we believe are civil issues, um, that we codify those and that becomes automatically state involved in punishing. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that's what I view criminal law as being, is behavior so out of the norm that the state, that society is deems that it's worthy of criminal sanction or imprisonment. And I don't see that that's necessarily the right way to approach this, because as I said, this is a fundamental breakdown of human relations.
Mm-hmm. 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 And exactly that's it. It's a breakdown in the relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, wow. And so I really don't have. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, Mike. What did Dan just say? We have a case at the moment, Safe Work New South Wales versus New South Wales Health, that will answer the question of civil versus criminal for harassment. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. I One of the things that I love about legislative changes and development is we get to live history, right? That
Mm-hmm.
15 years from now, Dan, people will be looking at that case and will be citing that case as it winds its way through the system. And we'll be quoting that case and we'll be saying, this is important. This is the way our society. I think that's really cool to be living through that sort of stuff. So enjoy the ride in Australia.
Yeah. And there's other people apparently just hiding in the chat or jumping in and out or whatever. So are there any other questions for myself or mainly Michael, since he's been here, Mike? Any at all, or is that it? Because we have covered a lot of ground. Oh, wow. Very cerebral discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope some
And
people
thanks for
got
the questions, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope your listeners, your followers,
Sure. Well,
I
this
hope
also
everybody
goes
gets something
on.
out of it.
Yeah, this also goes on the podcast on YouTube Music as well. So,
Oh,
yeah. Usually every live streams within a couple weeks get 100, 150 hits. So I'm certainly no, as we were talking the other night, no Ben Shapiro or anything like that. But yeah.
a few years from now, once SafeWorks New South Wales versus New South Wales Health winds its way through the system, maybe you'll be
Yeah.
up in 1.6 million follower
Yeah.
that category.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's more of a hobby. I just do it to give back, and yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if there's no other questions, once again, Michael, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy evening and joining me. And thanks for answering this Aussie's questions. You know, Dan, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for showing up.
Yeah.
And
And thanks for calling me a pelican as well. I was Googling Aussie insults, but most of them I don't think would be appropriate to say because Kevin made me promise not to harass anyone on this live stream.
yeah, that would be kind of a downer, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Yeah. Yeah. So once again, to those of you that are joining or getting this afterwards and seeing the rerun, shall we say, or the video on demand, as YouTube calls it, I want to thank Mike Sonderman for taking his time out. Feel free, leave comments afterwards. I appreciate the comments, try to answer them all. And if it's about the nuances of investigations, I'll do my best. But if not, I'll try and hit Mike up via email to answer anything. And what's next? Well, we'll carry on with the rest of the what series? Oh, safety culture series where we were working on. And next, we had gone through all of the things that can be wrong with the safety culture. So now we're going to talk about treatment. Looking at it from that paramedic point of view, is we found out what's hurting and ailing. So now we're going to start on treatment. So we'll begin that in a couple of weeks and then take some time off for Christmas. So once again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Dan, and any of you who are hiding in the wings. Take care, everybody. And do me a favor, just always keep in mind that safety leadership, it doesn't go with the title, it doesn't go with the position. It's doing and saying the right things in the right place at the right time and leading by example. Okay? So take care, everyone. Bye for now. And if you want to hang around for a couple of minutes, Mike, I'll end the stream. And nobody can hear us now, Mike.